The Laundering, Volume 2, Case 31, The Filing Cabinet. One category of data, given two different definitions by one government. Open the case.
Two arms of the same state looked at the same thing and wrote down two definitions. In March 2024, the Supreme Court of Canada held that your IP address is private, the key to unlocking a user's internet activity and ultimately their identity, and that police need a warrant to get it. In 2026, the government tabled a bill whose charter statement calls the same class of identifier not particularly sensitive, reachable on a lower standard. Reasonable grounds to suspect. The minister described the new apparatus as, quote, like a filing cabinet. This case is about that gap, and the office furniture word stretched across it.
Why not just read this as a fight about surveillance? Too much power or not enough?
Because that argument retires the structure. Strip the politics out, and a familiar grammar remains. The definitional dodge, first named at policy scale in Case 21. Here, run not on a word in a handbook, but on a category of evidence. The move is to take a thing the law already defines one way and quietly refile it under a cheaper definition, then build the machinery before anyone forces the two definitions back into the same room.
And the premises?
4. 1. The investigative need is real. Serious cases stall on data held by providers, and some modernization is defensible. Granted in full. 2. The same data the bill reaches, IP and subscriber identifiers, is what the Supreme Court, in Bikovets, defined as privacy-attracting and warrant-requiring. 3. A real need does not change what the data is. Necessity is an argument for a warrant. It is not a reason the datum stops being sensitive. 4. The spine. The bill writes the lower definition into statute and offers lawful access and a filing cabinet as if that settles the privacy question it actually steps around. The substitution of the cheaper definition is the laundering.
Start with the higher definition. What did the court actually hold?
On the 1st of March 2024, in R versus Bikovets, the Supreme Court held, by a 5-4 majority, that an IP address attracts a reasonable expectation of privacy and that a police request for one is a search under Section 8 of the Charter, requiring prior judicial authorization.
On what reasoning?
Not because of what the identifier spells on its own, but because of what it unlocks. In the court's words, it is the key to unlocking a user's internet activity and ultimately their identity. The digital rights group, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, makes the same point. Metadata can reveal who you communicate with, where you go, and when. The 5-4 split matters, and it is reported honestly. This is binding law, and it was a close call. Either way, it is the definition the state itself arrived at, in its highest court, for this exact category of data.
Now the lower definition. What does the bill say?
Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act, was introduced in March 2026 and is now before the Public Safety Committee. Among other things, it eases access to subscriber information and lets the government require core providers to retain metadata for up to 1 year. The Department of Justice's own charter statement sets the standard. The subscriber information, it says, does not by itself constitute particularly sensitive information since it identifies clients and services and excludes content, reachable on reasonable grounds, to suspect.
So where is the disagreement?
It is not factual. Both sides know what an IP address does. It is definitional. The court located the privacy interest in the linkage the identifier creates. The bill locates the absence of sensitivity in the identifier read by itself. Precisely the in isolation reading the court declined to adopt. The court said the key is sensitive because of the door. The bill says the key is just a key. Writing the in isolation definition into law is what lowers the threshold, and the lower threshold is the point.
Every laundering case has a specimen. What is the sentence here?
The ministers. Asked to describe what the bill builds, the government likened it to office furniture, an organized system, quote, like a filing cabinet, where certain types of information would be available with legal authorization.
Why is that the tell?
Because the image does two jobs at once. It makes a mandatory, standing, provider-built retention system sound like a thing every office already has, and it relocates the safeguard into the phrase with legal authorization, as if authorization were an external check rather than the very thing the bill is writing. The permission slip is printed by the office it admits you to. Before the committee, witnesses put the counter bluntly. Democracies do not keep a filing cabinet of every citizen's sensitive information on the chance it proves useful. And the title does its own quiet work. An act respecting lawful access preloads the verdict. The access is lawful because the act makes it so.
Build the other side at its strongest.
Gladly, because parts of it are correct. Serious investigations do stall on data held by providers with no standard way to respond. A metadata record is genuinely not the content of a message. Subscriber information really does, on its face, look like a name attached to a service. The bill keeps judicial authorization for many demands, and the government says it will amend the bill to make clear it does not require breaking encryption, that it is, in its phrase, encryption neutral. A reasonable person can hold that the rules need modernizing. And yet, grant all of it, the narrow claim survives, because none of it answers premise 2. That investigations are hard is an argument for a warrant on reasonable grounds, the Bykovets standard, not an argument that the datum has become less sensitive. Not content is true and beside the point. The court's holding was precisely that the non-content identifier is sensitive anyway because of what it unlocks. The strongest version establishes the access may be justified. It does not establish the lower definition the bill uses to make the access easy. Justification belongs at the threshold, in front of a judge, case by case, not in the definition, once for everyone.
Is there a second move?
There is. Don't define the contested term in the part everyone reads. Defer it. Critics argue much of C-22's real shape is left to regulation made by the Governor in Council, an appointed body, rather than written into the Act and debated. That is the same deferral named in Case 26, the load-bearing parameter set after the vote, in a register with less light on it. We carry that as the critic's reading, attributed and flagged against the text as passed.
Anything else flagged?
2 structures reported the same way. First, ministerial orders, with the Intelligence Commissioner as the check, a commissioner appointed, opponents note, on the government's recommendation. Second, secrecy. Digital rights groups and companies, including Google, warn the bill empowers secret orders a provider can be barred from disclosing. If that holds, it is the Case 29 sealed channel in a new statute. And Signal has said it would withdraw from Canada rather than comply, rather than compromise the privacy promises it has made to its users. End-to-end encryption, it says, is incompatible with exceptional access, no matter how creative the route.
Name it.
A government has a real problem. Data tied to crime, hard to reach. It has a binding definition of that data written by its own Supreme Court. Sensitive, warrant-bound. And it has a bill that needs the data cheaper to reach than that definition allows. So the bill supplies a second definition, not particularly sensitive, reachable on suspicion, names the apparatus lawful access, and calls it a filing cabinet. Each step reads as housekeeping. The integration is a category of evidence the courtroom calls private and the committee room calls furniture, with the difference written into law where it lowers a threshold.
And the louder claims around it?
Carried as named lenses, not adopted. That C-22 is mass surveillance, a real position, argued by serious people, sits beside the opposite lens, that this is overdue, supervised, encryption-neutral modernization. The series adjudicates neither. It insists only that the adjudication happen on the true definition of the data, the one the state already wrote down once, under oath, in a courtroom, rather than the convenience definition dressed as office furniture. When the next power arrives, described as a cabinet, a ledger, a registry, a folder, find the definition the same state gave it under oath and hold the new one against it. If the courtroom calls it a key and the committee room calls it a cabinet, you are not looking at storage. You are looking at the wash.